The Colosseum of Fools is a location in Hollow Knight that is surrounded by enigma and brings up many important questions that I hope to answer. Who was the Lord Fool? What are the warriors in the Colosseum fighting for? Are the warriors imprisoned or fighting voluntarily? Will I be able to spell Colosseum correctly on my first try by the time I'm done writing this script? Let's begin with who the Lord Fool is. It seems obvious that the Lord Fool would be the bug sitting on a throne, so the most likely candidate for who the Lord Fool is this guy on the fancy chair. So the question's answered, but not really. Researching this topic, I found quite a few theories that the Lord Fool is actually a worm, like the Pale King, and the corpse sitting on the throne is just one of his incarnations, whose previous shell has been turned into the Colosseum of Fools itself. However, there is one major flaw in this theory, and that is that the Colosseum of Fools is described as the shell of an ancient bug in the Wanderer's Journal. The reason this is an issue is because the description of a worm given by Mr. Mushroom is an ancient being who pulls bugs into its thrall. Now, this would seem to imply that worms themselves are not actually bugs, but are something that just control bugs, and if a worm is something other than a bug, then the Colosseum can't be the corpse of a worm, putting this theory to rest. However, I don't think this quote necessarily implies that worms themselves aren't bugs. But to understand this, we're going to have to visit the classics. 2007's critically acclaimed film Alvin and the Chipmunks. If you believe that the wording above implies that worms aren't bugs themselves, then the same logic could be applied to this movie to say that Alvin isn't a chipmunk. Who's to say an ancient being isn't just another bug? And if this is the case, the description matches up perfectly with that of the Wanderer's Journal. Now, this theory on its own most certainly isn't anything new, and on its own wouldn't warrant a video to be made about it. But the Lord Fool being a worm brings with it many interesting things that I think should be discussed. To start, it would help explain why the warriors are fighting in the Colosseum. As Mr. Mushroom said, worms can pull bugs into their thrall. So who's to say the Lord Fool, rather than making a kingdom like the Pale King wanted to use his power over these bugs to do, used his power to make these bugs fight in his Colosseum? I hardly think that this is outside the realm of possibility, because while it didn't last forever, the Pale King was able to have a far greater amount of bugs under his control. This then brings up the question, what bugs did the Lord Fool draw from in order to make his Colosseum? After all, a civilization where most of the living people are killed on a regular basis probably doesn't have the greatest longevity. To understand this, we can take a closer look at some of the enemies within the Colosseum, such as the Sharp Balder, the Primal Aspid, the Death Loodle, and the Armored Squid. Each of these enemies looks similar, but slightly different from a weaker variation you would have encountered earlier in the game. I believe this difference is due to some kind of branching evolution. We know that under the Pale King, the residents of the City of Tears atrophied in terms of strength and grew weak, so who's to say the bugs fighting in the Colosseum wouldn't grow strong? In other words, the bugs who inhabited the area controlled by the Pale King evolved to be weaker, while the bugs who inhabited the area near the Colosseum evolved to be stronger. We know that the Pale King ruled over Hollow Nest while the Colosseum of Fools existed due to the Pale Lurker hanging around the Colosseum, so this is actually pretty feasible. Assuming that everything said in this video is true so far, this will explain most of the history of the Colosseum of Fools prior to the Radiance's infection. But what happened after that? Well, for the most part, I would say that the Radiance's infection didn't have much of an impact on the Colosseum, as the bugs within it were already controlled by a powerful being, so being controlled by the Radiance would make relatively little of a difference to them. However, this wouldn't explain why the bugs would continue to fight under the Radiance after the Lord Fool had died. I think that this comes down to the bugs reverting back to their primal instincts under the Radiance's control. Although now that the Lord Fool is dead, they no longer have a need to fight, it has become a sort of instinct for them to do so, and thus the vicious cycle of killing continues. And that's it. The story of the Colosseum. All the loose ends tied together. Except for one. Why are the bugs from the Soul Sanctum over in the Colosseum of Fools? If my theory regarding the ancient bugs being drawn here from the same source as the bugs being drawn to the Pale King is true, it would make no sense why these bugs would have come here. Except I think I've come up with a reasonable enough explanation for why these bugs are here. You see, in this whole sanctum, these bugs were sacrificing many bugs in order to extract their soul. But you have to think that they would run out of bugs to kill eventually, so where else would they go to find more subjects than to places predicated entirely on killing other bugs? And that is the story of the Colosseum of Fools, a worms entertainment project that resulted in the death of hundreds, if not thousands, of bugs. And I didn't even have to mention T